The ash fell like gray snow across the broken world of Drakmor 4. 3 hours had passed since the last explosion, but the silence felt wrong. Too heavy, too complete. The battlefield stretched for miles in every direction, covered in twisted metal and burnt ground. Pieces of destroyed starships stuck up from the earth like strange monuments to the dead. Vor Mathrax came down through the dark clouds. He was enormous, bigger than any ship that had fought here. His body was covered in scales that looked like crystal, catching what little light came through the smoke. Each scale was the size of a human hand, and they made soft chiming sounds when he moved, like distant bells. The dragon was old, very old. He had lived for more than 15,000 years and had watched entire civilizations rise up from nothing and then fall back into dust. Most of the younger species in the galaxy thought dragons were just stories, myths that drunk spacers told in bars to frighten new recruits. The few who knew dragons were real were terrified of them. Vor Mathrax walked carefully across the battlefield. His claws, each one longer than a grown human, touched the ground with surprising gentleness. He barely disturbed the ash that covered everything. He had come here looking for something specific, an ancient artifact that was supposed to be on one of the human colony's ships, a data core from precursors, the mysterious race that had vanished 50,000 years ago. Such objects were rare and valuable, even to dragons who had little use for most treasures. But as he moved through the wreckage, something else caught his attention. His senses, far more developed than any human technology, detected something unexpected, something alive. The dragon's massive head turned toward a white pod half buried under a collapsed ship's wing. It was a survival pod, the kind colony ships carry for emergencies. The outside was scorched black on one side from fire or explosion. Its emergency beacon had stopped working. No light blinked on its surface. No signal call for help. The power cell must have died hours ago. Everything inside should be dead. But Vor Mathrax heard a heartbeat. Small, fast, stubborn. He moved closer, curious now. With one claw, he carefully peeled back the damaged door of the pod. The metal screamed as it bent, but the dragon's touch was precise. Inside, wrapped in silver thermal blankets, a human baby cried. 2 adults lay dead beside the infant. His parents, clearly, they had died protecting him. Their bodies curled around the child even in death. The baby was perhaps 6 months old. His tiny fist punched at the air as if he were fighting some invisible enemy. His face was red from crying, tears streaming down his cheeks. When he saw the dragon, this massive creature that filled his entire view, he didn't quiet down. He didn't freeze in fear. Instead, his crying grew louder, angrier, almost defiant. Vor Mathrax stared at the child. Logic said he should leave. Humans bred quickly and in large numbers. One infant meant nothing in the vast calculation of galactic populations. Dragons had stopped interfering in the affairs of younger species 3,000 years ago, after a disaster on the world of Velshera. Interference only brought complications, unexpected consequences, chaos. But something about this baby's cry made the dragon pause. It wasn't a cry of fear or surrender. Even facing a creature that could swallow him whole, even after spending hours alone with his dead parents, the infant's cry sounded challenging, like he was angry at the universe for what had happened, like he refused to accept it. The dragon's ancient mind turned this over. He had been studying the patterns of galactic civilizations for thousands of years. The same cycle repeated endlessly. A species would rise, expand across the stars, grow comfortable and corrupt, then tear itself apart in civil war or be destroyed by external threats. He had seen it happen 17 times with 17 different species. Humans were following the same path. Their concordat was already showing cracks. The rich core worlds grew richer, while the poor rim colonies starved. Resources that should build schools and hospitals went at endless war with the Xerus swarm. In 50 years, maybe less, human civilization would fracture and collapse like all the others before it. Unless something changed. Unless someone could break the pattern. Vor Mathrax looked at the crying infant again. What if he took this child? Raised him outside human culture, outside their limitations and prejudices? Taught him to think in terms of centuries instead of years, to see patterns instead of individual events? One human, raised by a dragon, free from the tribal thinking that doomed every species. Perhaps such a person could become something new. Perhaps he could save his species from themselves. Or perhaps this was just a fancy of an old dragon who had lived too long and was looking for something interesting to fill his remaining millennia. The baby grabbed one of Vormathrax's crystalline talons with both small hands. He was still crying, but now it sounded more like anger than fear. The dragon could crush the child with the smallest movement, but those tiny hands gripped the talon tightly, holding on. Interesting, Vormathrax said in Draktung, his voice like grinding mountains. His decision crystallized in that moment. He would take the child. He would raise him, teach him, forge him into something the galaxy had never seen. It might work. It might fail. But dragons had time to spare for experiments. The dragon's wings unfurled, spreading wide like crystalline sails. Each wing was as long as a starship. Strange energies began to gather around him, making the air shimmer and crack. He was preparing to jump through quantum space, to vanish to a place hidden from all star charts. A human patrol ship broke through the clouds above, its sensors sweeping the battlefield. They were searching for survivors, for salvage, for anything useful in the wreckage. Their instruments detected the massive energy signature building around the dragon, but they were too late. Reality folded around Vormathrax like paper. There was a sound like thunder, a flash of light, and then nothing. The dragon was gone. The survival pod was empty, except for 2 dead adults. And somewhere between dimensions, traveling to a sanctuary that existed outside normal space, an ancient dragon carried a crying human infant wrapped in burnt blankets. The baby had stopped crying now. He looked up at the creature, holding him with dark, curious eyes. He didn't understand what was happening. He wouldn't remember this day when he grew older, but somewhere deep inside, his defiant spirit remained. The same stubbornness that had kept him alive when he should have died. The same fire that had made him cry in anger at a dragon instead of freezing in fear. Vormathrax noticed this and felt something rare in his ancient heart. Hope. Perhaps this experiment would work after all. Behind them, the battlefield of Drakmor 4 grew smaller and disappeared. Ahead lay 18 years of training, learning, and transformation. The galaxy continued its slow spiral toward chaos, unaware that one small variable had just been removed from the equation. One angry, defiant infant who refused to surrender. The dragon vanished completely, taking the child with him into legend. The palace was made entirely of crystal and existed in a place that shouldn't be possible. It floated in a pocket dimension, a tiny bubble reality that Vormathrax had created long ago. Here, the normal rules didn't apply. Time moved strangely. 10 years might pass inside, while 12 years passed in the regular universe. The dragon had never bothered to measure it exactly. Time meant little to a creature who had lived for 15,000 years. Tamine Vale hung in the middle of a large sphere, floating in zero gravity. He was 10 years old now, though he looked small for his age. His body was thin but packed with muscle, like steel cable wrapped tight. His black hair was cut short, and his dark eyes moved constantly, watching everything. Around him, enemies appeared from nowhere. They were holograms, not real, but programmed to act real. A Zirith warrior drone materialized to his left, its multiple legs clicking. To his right, a Krell mercenary raised a plasma rifle. Above him, an automated turret rotated, targeting his chest. Each one was designed to kill if this were real combat. Tamine's heart pounded, but his breathing stayed calm. Fear was useless. Vormathrax had taught him that years ago through pain and repetition. The Zirith drone lunged first. Tamine twisted his body, using the small thruster on his belt to dodge sideways in the zero gravity. The drone's claws passed through the space where his head had been a second before. He grabbed its leg as it passed and used its own momentum to throw it into the Krell mercenary. Plasma fire lit up the sphere. Tamine pushed off the curve wall, spinning. The shots missed him by inches. He could feel the heat as they passed. "You're hesitating," Vormathrax's voice boomed through the chamber. The dragon watched from an observation gallery above, his massive form coiled like a sleeping mountain. "In real combat, you'd be dead twice already." Tamine didn't answer. He was too busy staying alive. The turret fired again. He used his thruster to drop suddenly, and the blast destroyed the Krell hologram instead. That left the Zira drone, and 2 more turrets that had just appeared. His muscles burned. Sweat poured down his face. He'd been training for 3 hours without a break. The Zira drone came at him again, faster this time. Tamine waited until the last possible moment, then redirected its momentum into one of the turrets. The collision created a small explosion that gave him cover. In that brief moment, he spotted what he'd been searching for, a small panel on the central column that Vormathrax had hidden in every simulation. He pushed off hard, flying straight for it. Turret fire followed him. One shot grazed his shoulder, and the pain was real even though the weapon was not. The medical systems would heal it later, but right now it hurt like fire. His hand slapped the emergency shutdown panel. All the holograms vanished instantly. The lights came up. Gravity returned slowly, lowering him gently to the floor. Tamine collapsed his hands and knees, gasping for air. His training clothes were soaked through with sweat. Every muscle trembled. He was small for 10, but his body was efficient, built for survival rather than appearance. His eyes held a wariness that no child should have, the look of someone who had seen too much danger too young. Better, Vormathrax said, and those words felt like high praise because the dragon rarely gave compliments. You found the shutdown. You used their strengths against them, but you hesitated before the final move. They're not real, Tamine said in Draktung. He'd been speaking the ancient dragon language longer than Korean or Standard Galactic. It felt more natural to him than human speech. Does that matter? The dragon's crystalline scales chimed softly as he shifted position. Hesitation in simulation becomes hesitation in reality. Hesitation means death. Tamine looked up at his guardian. Teacher. Captor. He still wasn't sure which word fit best. Why are you training me like this? Normal humans don't live in places like this. They don't fight things like that. Exactly, Vormathrax said, his ancient eyes reflecting light like mirrors. Most humans live comfortable lives until something stronger destroys them. You will be different. You must be different. Why? The dragon was quiet for a long moment. Because I chose you. Because when you were 6 months old, you cried defiance at me instead of cowering in fear. Because your species stands at the edge of a cliff, and someone must pull them back before they fall. I don't understand. You will, in time. 5 years later, everything had changed and nothing had changed. Tamine was 15 now, taller and leaner. His face had lost its childhood softness, replaced by sharp angles and a permanent intensity in his eyes. He looked older than 15, more like 18 or 20. Hard training, and harder lessons did that to a person. He sat in the archive chamber, surrounded by floating crystals that glowed with stored information. Each crystal contained knowledge from civilizations that had been dead for thousands of years. Today's lesson was about the precursors, the mysterious race that had vanished 50,000 years ago. They had technology beyond anything in the current galaxy, Vormathrax explained. The crystals displayed images, massive cities that floated in space, weapons that could destroy stars, ships that could cross the galaxy in days instead of years. They could reshape entire planets. They created artificial suns. They believed themselves invincible. What killed them? Tamine asked, taking notes on a holographic screen that floated beside him. Themselves. The dragon's voice was heavy with old memory. Civil war, resource depletion, philosophical divisions that turned violent. They had everything, and they destroyed it all fighting over ideas and territory. The patterns are always the same. I've watched it happen 17 times across different species. And humans, following the same path. The images shifted, showing current galactic maps. Your Concordat grows corrupt. The rich core worlds feast while the poor rim colonies starve. The war with the Zira drains resources that should build schools and hospitals. In 50 years, perhaps less, human civilization will tear itself apart. Tamine was quiet, processing this. Is that why you took me? To stop it. To try. Vormathrax's eyes gleamed like distant stars. One individual raised outside human limitations, free from tribal thinking. Perhaps you can see what they cannot. Perhaps you can break the pattern that dooms every species. And if I fail? The dragon's laugh sounded like rocks grinding together. Then I wasted 18 years on an interesting experiment. Dragons have time to spare for failures. The word sure felt cold and cruel. But Tameen had learned to hear what Vormathrax didn't say. The dragon had spent 15 years teaching him, protecting him, pushing him beyond what any human should be capable of. That wasn't the behavior of someone conducting a casual experiment. When do I go back? Tameen asked quietly. Soon, when you're ready. Vormathrax paused. 3 more years. Then I return you to your species, and we discover if my experiment succeeds or fails. 3 years felt both too long and too short. This crystal palace was the only home Tameen had ever known. Vormathrax was the only family he had. Nexus Station was one of the largest trading hubs in the galaxy. Thousands of beings from hundreds of different species came here to buy, sell, and make deals. The commerce deck was always crowded, always noisy, always busy. Then Vormathrax appeared, and everything stopped. The dragon materialized in the center of the deck with a crack of displaced air that sounded like thunder. He was massive, too big for the space, really. His crystalline scales reflected the station lights in 1,000 directions, creating rainbow patterns on the walls. People screamed and ran in every direction. Tameen stood beside the dragon, trying not to show how overwhelmed he felt. He was 18 years old now, tall and lean with sharp features and dark eyes that moved constantly. He'd practiced for this moment 1,000 times in simulations, but reality was so much more than he'd expected. The smell hit him first. Hundreds of different species, each with their own scent. Cooking food, alien perfumes, machine oil, and things he couldn't identify. The noise was overwhelming, too. Alarm screamed. People shouted in dozens of languages. His translator, Implant, struggled to keep up. And the people, so many people. Tameen had never seen another living being besides Vormathrax in 18 years. Now hundreds surrounded him, all staring, all afraid. Station security arrived within minutes, their boots pounding on the metal floor. They wore heavy armor and carried weapons designed to stop most threats. Their commander was a human man in his 50s with gray hair and scars across his face. His name tag read Commander Kim. He kept his plasma rifle pointed at Vormathrax but didn't fire. Something in his eyes said he'd seen enough combat to know when a predator was hunting and when it wasn't. Dragon, Commander Kim said carefully, his voice steady despite the weapon trembling slightly in his hands. This is neutral territory. State your business and leave. Vormathrax's voice boomed out, enhanced by draconic harmonics that made every translator in the area activate at once. I mean no harm. I come to return something taken 18 years ago. The dragon gestured toward Tameen with one massive claw. 18 years ago, I took a human infant from the battlefield of Drakmor 4. I have trained him, educated him, prepared him. Now I return him to his species. What you do with him will determine whether your civilization survives or falls. Before anyone could respond or ask questions, Vormathrax simply vanished. The air cracked with the sound of quantum displacement, and then the dragon was gone as if he'd never been there. Tameen stood alone, surrounded by weapons and hundreds of staring eyes. He'd practiced this speech many times. I am Tameen Vale, he said in standard Galactic, though his accent was strange, too formal, with undertones that sounded almost draconic. Colonial Registry, New Busan Settlement. Missing in action, Drakmor 4, 18 years ago. Commander Kim's expression shifted from combat readiness to confusion. He lowered his rifle slightly. The Dragon Boy, the legend, it's actually true. Apparently, Tameen said, the words felt inadequate, but he didn't know what else to say. 3 days later, Tameen sat in a small white room in the Concordat security facility. They'd been asking him the same questions over and over. Where had he been? What had the dragon taught him? Was he loyal to humanity? Could he be trusted? Genetic testing had confirmed his identity. He was definitely Tameen Vale, son of Soo-Yun and Yunji Vale, both killed at Drakmor 4. The psychological evaluations called him socially maladjusted but cognitively exceptional. The military assessments flagged him as potentially dangerous. All accurate, Tameen supposed. He didn't understand human social customs. He thought differently than normal humans. And yes, he was dangerous. Vormathrax had made sure of that. The door opened and a woman entered. She was in her 50s with gray streaking through her black hair and eyes that had seen too many battles. Her uniform identified her as Admiral Jaiwan Park, Senior Military Command. She dismissed the other officers with a gesture and sat down across from Tameen. "You've caused quite a stir," she said without preamble. "The media is having a field day. Politicians want to use you as propaganda. Scientists want to study your brain. And I—" She paused, studying him. "I want to know if the dragon was right. Are you ready?" "For what?" Admiral Park slid a datapad across the table. "The Helix Reach. 6 star systems with critical resources. The Zereth Swarm is overrunning them. We've lost 47 ships in 3 months. Conventional tactics aren't working. We're weeks from complete collapse, and 10 million colonists will die when it happens." Tameen picked up the datapad and began reading. His mind, trained by Dragon Logic for 18 years, immediately saw patterns in the tactical data. "You're fighting them wrong," he said after a moment. "You're using conventional strategies against an enemy that adapts to conventional strategies. You need asymmetric warfare. Target their communication nodes. Use psychological tactics they can't predict. Make them react instead of act." "Exactly what I thought when I read your preliminary assessment." Admiral Park leaned forward. "I'm offering you a position. Tactical consultant. You'll command a small experimental unit. Prove the dragon right, or prove him wrong. Your choice. And if I refuse, then you're just another curiosity, and the Helix Reach falls and 10 million people die." She stood up. "Your choice, Tameen Vale. Be what the dragon made you, or be nothing." Tameen looked at the tactical data again. These weren't just numbers and ship positions. They were lives. Real human lives, not simulations. People who would die if he did nothing. Vormathrax's final lesson echoed in his mind. Knowledge without action is worthless. "I'll do it," Tameen said, meeting the Admiral's eyes. "But I'm not a weapon. I'm a person making a choice." For the first time, Admiral Park smiled. It wasn't a warm smile, but it was genuine. "Good enough. Welcome to the Concordat military. Consultant Vale. Try not to get killed in your first week." She left him alone with the datapad. Tameen studied the tactical information for hours, his mind already forming strategies. The Helix Reach was a death trap, using conventional thinking. But Vormathrax hadn't trained him in conventional thinking. He began to see possibilities others had missed. Weaknesses in the Zereth formation. Opportunities hiding in what looked like certain defeat. It would be dangerous. People would probably die. But doing nothing guaranteed everyone would die. For 18 years, he'd trained in isolation. Now it was time to see if all those lessons meant anything in the real world. Tameen took a deep breath and began writing his operational plan. Somewhere he felt certain Vormathrax was watching. The dragon had brought him to this moment. Now everything depended on whether the experiment would succeed or fail. The galaxy was broken. The question was whether one human, raised by a dragon, could help fix it, or whether he would just be another failure in a long history of failures. Either way, he was about to find out. The Outcasts, that's what they called themselves, and the name fit perfectly. 37 people that nobody else wanted. Disgraced veterans who'd made mistakes or disobeyed bad orders. Volunteers from the poor rim colonies who had courage but almost no training. A few aliens who joined the Concordat military when their own species rejected them. They were the bottom of the barrel, and they knew it. Captain Mio Choi was Tameen's second in command, assigned by Admiral Park. He was in his early 30s with a scarred face and cold eyes. He'd been Special Forces once, one of the best, until he disobeyed orders that would have gotten his entire squad killed. The court-martial had destroyed his career. Now he was stuck leading outcasts with a teenager who'd been raised by a monster. Their first meeting did not go well. "You're what, 19? Miho said, looking taming up and down with obvious skepticism. Raised by a dragon in some magic cave, and we're supposed to trust you to lead us against the Zereth. Taming met his gaze calmly. 18 years with Vormathrax had taught him not to flinch from confrontation. No, you're supposed to follow orders and survive. Trust is optional. The room full of outcasts went quiet. Some looked amused. Others looked angry. A few just looked tired, like they'd already accepted they were going to die and didn't care anymore. Miho stared at him for a long moment, then laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. At least you're honest. All right, Dragon Boy. Show us this brilliant plan that's supposed to save the Helix Reach. Taming activated the holographic display. The tactical situation appeared in 3 dimensions, showing star systems, ship positions, and Zereth formations. It looked hopeless. The Zereth had overwhelming numbers and better positions. Here's what we're not going to do, Taming said. We're not going to assault their fortress directly. That's suicide. No kidding, someone muttered. Instead, we're going to make them think something valuable is escaping. We'll trigger their pursuit instinct and lead them into the asteroid field's radiation belt. While they're confused and scattered, we slip past their defenses and destroy their communication nexus. The room was silent. Then a woman with burn scars across her face spoke up. That's insane. The radiation belt will fry our systems too. Not if we shield properly and move fast. The Zereth use organic sensors. Radiation blinds them more than it blinds us. Miho studied the plan with narrowed eyes. He'd led enough missions to recognize both brilliance and stupidity, and sometimes they looked identical. And the bait ship that draws them out? Who pilots that suicide run? I will, Taming said simply. The room erupted in protests. Miho held up a hand for silence. You're the tactical commander. You can't risk yourself on the most dangerous part. Yes, I can. I won't order anyone into danger I'm not willing to face myself. Something changed in Miho's eyes then. Not trust exactly, but maybe the beginning of respect. You're either brave or stupid, kid. Maybe both. Probably both, Taming agreed. The mission launched at dawn, ship time. Taming piloted a modified scout ship, fast and maneuverable but lightly armed. His heart pounded as he approached Zereth territory. Every sensor screamed warnings. Behind him, the outcast followed in a larger transport, staying hidden. Vormathrax had broken him of panic responses years ago through brutal training, but fear was still there. He just didn't let it control him. The Zereth took the bait. Dozens of bioships erupted from the asteroid fortress, pursuing what they thought was an escaping intelligence officer. Their organic hulls rippled as they moved, looking more like sea creatures than spacecraft. Taming led them deeper into the asteroid field, weaving between rocks the size of mountains. The Zereth followed, fast and coordinated. Then he hit the radiation belt. His ship's shields flared as radiation washed over them. Alarms shrieked. But he kept flying, kept leading the Zereth deeper. Their organic sensors started failing. The swarm's coordination broke apart. Individual ships scattered, confused and blind. Now, Taming transmitted to Miho. The outcast transport slipped past the compromised defenses. Miho led a team inside the asteroid fortress, while the Zereth were still chasing ghosts outside. They moved fast, planting plasma charges on the communication nexus, the biological node that coordinated all Zereth forces in 3 systems. Charges set, Miho reported. Extraction point Alpha. Move your ass, Dragon Boy. Taming pulled a scout ship around, racing back toward the rendezvous point. Behind him, the charges detonated. The asteroid fortress erupted in silent flame. No sound in the vacuum of space, just light and debris spreading outward. The communication nexus died. Every Zereth ship in 3 systems suddenly lost coordination. They stopped working as a unified swarm and became individual, confused organisms. The Helix Reach front collapsed. For the Zereth, Concordat forces, who'd been barely holding on, suddenly pushed forward. Without coordination, the Zereth were just animals fighting alone. Within 3 days, the 6 systems were secure. The outcasts returned to base as heroes. They'd lost 2 people, a weapons specialist and pilot, but saved millions. The celebration in the hangar bay was loud and chaotic. Tameen stood apart from the celebration, looking out a viewport at the recovered wreckage floating in space. He'd seen the Xereth ships die, watched their biological hulls cook in the void. They were alien and hostile, but they'd been alive. Admiral Park found him there. You did well. The Helix reach holds. Casualty rates dropped 70%. You're a hero. I'm a killer, Tameen said quietly. Efficient, maybe, but still a killer. War demands that. Vor Mathrax taught me that war is a failure of intelligence. Winning battles doesn't fix the problems that cause them. He turned to face her. The Xereth aren't evil. They're desperate, fighting for survival just like we are. We're both symptoms of a larger problem. Admiral Park was quiet for a moment. You're not what I expected. Most soldiers embrace glory. You look haunted. Because I am. Tameen looked back at the stars. The dragon didn't train me just to win fights. There's something larger happening, and I'm only beginning to understand it. That night, alone in his quarters, Tameen felt Vormathrax's presence somehow, a weight in his mind, a certainty that he was being watched from far away. The dragon had taught him to sense such things. The battle was won. But Tameen understood now that it was just one small victory in a much larger war. Not the war against the Xereth, but the war against a cycle that destroyed every civilization eventually. Vormathrax had shown him the pattern. Now, he had to figure out how to break it. Somewhere in the quantum void, the dragon watched his experiment and wondered if this young human would succeed where countless others had failed. The real test was still coming. The listening post sat on a dead moon at the edge of known space. It had been abandoned for years, its equipment rusted and broken. Tameen stood in the empty control room, waiting. The message that brought him here had been encrypted in a way only he could understand, using patterns from Drakdung that no computer could crack. He knew who had sent it. Tameen was 20 years old now and looked older. His face was harder, his eyes more tired. He commanded 3 full divisions, thousands of soldiers who trusted him with their lives. He'd won 14 major engagements against impossible odds. People called him a hero, a genius, humanity's greatest hope. But he felt like a fraud. Yes, they'd won battles. Yes, they'd pushed back the Xereth. But the Concordat was still tearing itself apart from the inside. The rich core worlds kept getting richer, while the poor rim colonies starved. Politicians put his face on recruitment posters, while ignoring every warning he gave about the internal collapse coming. Military victories meant nothing if civilization destroyed itself anyway. You understand now. A voice rumbled behind him. Tameen didn't turn around. He'd been expecting this. Understand what? That winning fights is meaningless if we're fighting the wrong enemy. Vormathrax materialized fully, his crystalline scales catching the dim light. The dragon looked exactly the same as 18 years ago. Ancient, powerful, eternal. Partly. But there's more. Come, I'll show you what I couldn't tell you before. The dragon's claw touched Tameen's shoulder gently. Reality twisted and folded. They stood somewhere else now. Tameen wasn't sure if it was real, or a vision, or a memory from long ago. Massive ruins surrounded them. Cities that made Concordat architecture look like children's toys. But everything was destroyed, burned, torn apart. Bodies lay everywhere, so old they turned to dust. The precursors, Vormathrax said, 50,000 years ago. The last victims of the cycle. What cycle? Tameen's voice was barely a whisper. Every 50,000 years, something awakens. We dragons don't know what it is. A force, an entity, a law of the universe itself. It feeds on chaos and conflict. It amplifies every division, every fear, every hatred. Advanced civilizations destroy themselves or are destroyed. The precursors fought each other until nothing remained. Before them, the Velshera. Before them, species whose names are lost time. The vision changed. Tameen saw the current galaxy, not in space, but as patterns of connection and conflict. The Concordat fracturing. The Xereth swarm growing more desperate. Other species caught in expanding wars. Everything spiraling toward chaos. It's happening again, Vormathrak said quietly. The cycle is beginning. The Zereth aren't your real enemy. They're refugees fleeing dying worlds, pushed into conflict by forces they don't understand. The same forces affecting humanity. The real threat isn't them. It's the pattern itself. Tamine felt cold despite the vision's unreality. Why tell me this? What can one human do against something that destroys entire civilizations? Dragons tried direct intervention before. We failed. We're too alien, too feared. When we act, species unite against us instead of their real problems. Vormathrax's eyes gleamed. But you think like a dragon but feel like a human. You understand both perspectives. You can build bridges where we cannot. You want me to unite the galaxy? Tamine laughed, but there was no humor in it. I can barely get two Concordat admirals to agree on anything. How am I supposed to unite entire civilizations? I want you to try. Perhaps you'll fail. Perhaps the cycle is inevitable. But you, that infant who cried defiance at me on a battlefield, you might be different. You might surprise me. The vision faded. They stood again on the dead moon, in the abandoned listening post. What if I refuse? Tamine asked quietly. What if I just want a normal life? Then I'll find another candidate. But you won't refuse. Vormathrax began to fade, becoming transparent. It's not in your nature. I didn't choose you randomly. Tamine Vale. I chose you because you were already special. I just made you more so. The dragon vanished completely, leaving Tamine alone with impossible knowledge and an impossible task. 6 months passed. Tamine used his military reputation and Admiral Park support to create something new, the Helix Accord. It started small. A few progressive core world representatives who actually cared about the Rim colonies. Rim leaders tired of being exploited. Even some reformed Zereth who'd broken away from the swarm, tired of endless war. The first meeting almost collapsed into violence 3 times. The second meeting was worse. But slowly, painfully, they began to talk, to listen, to find common ground. It was messy and imperfect. People argued constantly. Some representatives walked out. Others joined. The Accord nearly died a dozen times in those first months. But it survived. 20 years after that, Tamine stood on reconstructed Drakmor for the planet where his parents had died, now rebuilt as a symbol of cooperation. He was 40 years old with gray streaking his black hair. Command and responsibility age people fast. The planet was thriving now. The first joint project between core worlds and rim colonies. Humans and aliens working together. It should have been impossible, but it existed. Tamine stood before a memorial to battle, names carved in stone. He found his parents' names, Suhyun and Yunji Vale. He'd never known them, but he understood their sacrifice now. Talking to ghosts? A voice asked. Yunahan joined him. She was the Accord's chief diplomat, brilliant and idealistic. One of the few people who treated Tamine like a person instead of a legend. Thinking, he said, wondering if any of this matters. We're so small against the galaxy's problems. Every movement starts small. You taught me that. Vormathrax taught me. I'm just trying not to fail. Is he watching? Always. As if summoned by his name, the dragon materialized in the empty plaza. Security forces tensed but didn't panic. Vormathrax had appeared publicly several times over the years. People were getting used to it. Did I succeed? Tamine asked. Your experiment? Vormathrax considered the question. You survived. Built something fragile but real. Convinced thousands to choose cooperation over conflict. The pattern isn't broken, but you've bent it. That may be enough. And the cycle, the ancient threat, still coming. But later than I calculated. Your Accord bought time. Decades, perhaps centuries. No dragon has ever achieved that through another being. So I'm still your weapon. No. Something like warmth entered the dragon's voice. You stopped being my weapon when you chose your own path. I gave you tools. You decided how to use them. That was always the real test. Vormathrax began to fade. I'll watch from the shadows. The galaxy is changing because you changed it, Tamine Vale. Whether that's enough, we'll discover together. The dragon vanished into legend once more. 20 more years passed. Taemin stood in a classroom on New Busan Colony, named after his parents' settlement. Children sat at desks, human and alien mixed together, learning side by side. He taught strategy and history now, passing on lessons.